While Sega and Namco were in competition to produce the most advanced racer, the industry was about to shift into the next gear. In the mid-80s, the global golden age for the arcade industry was transitioning into a challenging new chapter. For Sega, it was equally the beginning of a new era, having gone through a turbulent series of events at the corporate level. Their US subsidiary was sold off, while the Japan-based operations continued under a new parent company. This resulted in a greater reliance on their Tokyo-based arcade video game development team than ever before. What lay ahead were a crucial few years for the company to keep their spot among the top arcade developers, not as a publisher or developer of electromechanical games of yesterday, but as a frontrunner in the rapidly advancing world of microprocessor-based arcade games. What they needed was to expand their team with bright young talent to help reach their goals. Like their competitors, Sega had begun to rely on their standardized arcade boards that were able to run a series of games. But while these boards and cabinets had quickly become the norm, it also meant there was opportunity to be found in breaking from this trend. The underlying concept for a new standout arcade experience presented itself to Sega when they were pitched a torsion bar, enabling them to make an arcade cabinet that could bank and tilt. This feature would be particularly useful for a new, exciting motorcycle racing game. Project manager Yoshi Ishii appointed the young recruit Yu Suzuki as game designer and programmer, being the passionate motorbiker he was. Supported by a small team in both hardware and software development, they began working on this ambitious project. Suzuki was adamant to replicate the key essence of what made riding a motorbike fun with his game. The replica motorbike would provide the player with an immersive means of controlling the game, using their full body to steer the in-game bike. Supported by top-of-the-line hardware, it would simulate in the player's mind the sense of speed and of being a master of the technique hanging off to dash through corners. For the design of the motorcycle, Suzuki didn't have to look far. He followed motorsports closely, particularly the prestigious GP 500cc class. The young Freddie Spencer was one of the leading talents at the time. Despite suffering injuries and being faced with startup issues with Honda's new bike, he was eager to make the 1985 championship the most memorable in his career. Suzuki was an avid admirer of his talent and technique and based the design of the hang-on bike on the Honda V4. However, as the first prototype took shape, Suzuki was growing skeptical about whether the torsion bar would be suitable for his vision. He went with his gut feeling and instead proposed a mechanism consisting of springs that would be more reliable at holding the bike steady at an angled position. Besides the stylish motorcycle, the arcade game boasts some impressive hardware under the hood. Hang-On would be a showcase for Sega's latest arcade board development. It used their upcoming 16-bit board and further boosted its performance by doubling the CPUs. The sophisticated graphics chipset encompassed an array of processors, each with their dedicated function, from generating the road layer to drawing backgrounds or sprites, all combined to create dynamic visuals with parallax effects. The ability to scale sprites in real time had been a key feature among arcade developers to simulate a 3D playfield. The Hang-On board offered a more robust solution that was able to scale a substantial number of sprites in real time. Nevertheless, to line up all sprite objects among the racetrack required some clever coding. Yu Suzuki had studied 3D programming at his university before joining Sega, a skill that would immediately come to use. He used 3D logic inside the game program to calculate all the object positions and scale factors. All the new graphic capabilities helped to realize the desired look and feel. A large bike sprite for visual impact and a range of colorful landscapes. The changing skies would simulate the transition from day to night and provided each track with its own mood. Another area in which Hang-On would push the boundaries both technically and creatively was in its soundtrack. The mid-80s was a transitional era for music in arcade games. Just as drawing pixel art was rapidly becoming a field for artists, composing games music was on its way to becoming a dedicated profession. However, when Hang-On was in development, it was still common practice to reach out to a fellow developer with some experience in music. For instance, Yoji Ishii had produced sound effects in the past and would deliver a few supporting melodies. New recruit Hiroshi Kawaguchi also responded to Suzuki's request. He had recently joined the company and was assigned to the programming department, although his passion lay in audio. Hang On provided the inspiring musician with the perfect career opportunity. In his spare time, he composed a high-energy rock-style theme to propel the player, fully taking advantage of the new Yamaha audio chip. With its FM and PCM audio capabilities, the chip was able to produce a rich sound that was a huge step up from the electronic beeps of earlier boards. The PCM audio chip was also used to play back the authentic pass-by sound effect samples. The 4 built-in speakers in the arcade machine contributed to a true surround sound experience. And so Hang On was a complete package: state-of-the-art graphics, a full audio experience, and an immersive control scheme. Hang On debuted in the arcades in July of 1985, a month in which Freddie Spencer managed to win 2 successive GPs. Arcade-goers could emulate that feeling in the thrilling arcade game. The deluxe cabinet offered an experience that players couldn't get with their home systems. At its launch, it was among the first true showpieces of the 16-bit generation hardware and raised the company's profile. The release of Hang On coincided with the opening of Sega's US office, taking distribution once again into their own hands. The game was in such high demand that they even had to contact Williams Electronics to help manufacture the upright models. It was the financial success they needed in the still struggling local arcade market, allowing them to keep their modest base of operations running on US soil, which would provide a springboard for their future plans. Meanwhile, Suzuki had already been assigned a follow-up project, one that would ultimately go against all market research and rely on his broad range of interests. Like with Hang On, the roots of the project can be traced to a piece of hardware, a hydraulic seat that Yu Suzuki and the head of Sega's arcade division, Hisashi Suzuki, had encountered at a trade show. Their mechatronics group was ordered to develop the concept for a thrilling game. Sega, with their long history in amusement hardware, was actually among the few arcade developers to have such a department. While they worked on the moving arcade machine, Suzuki was appointed to realize the already proposed game concept from a colleague, a 3D perspective, military-themed shooting game. However, he immediately recognized an obstacle: how to fit the on-screen graphics into the available video RAM while also using big sprites for visual impact. All animation frames for the planned Harrier jet would be too taxing on the limited video RAM available. The project continued with a small placeholder as they considered alternatives. Partly inspired by the animated feature Space Adventure Cobra, the game designer decided on a human character with superpowers. This allowed them to get away with fewer animation frames, as they didn't need all the banks and tilts of the jet fighter. The new protagonist was just one of the deviations from the military theme described in the original design document. While Harrier remained in the project's name, it would be set in a sci-fi fantasy world. Inspiration came from various personal interests among the team. Suzuki himself had been reading through the works of Albert Einstein, becoming intrigued with the concept of time travel. At the same time, he and one of the graphic artists on the team shared a passion for the work of Roger Dean, an illustrator well known for his album cover art for bands like Yes and Asia. In his work, he portrays lush, surrealistic worlds with stylish architecture. Inspired by Dean's work and contemporary movies, Suzuki inhabited Space Harrier with organic life forms and creatures of fantastical natures. His fellow programmer, Satoshi Mifune, on the other hand, added the mechanical creatures, leading to a unique blend. The organic and futuristic obstacles had the benefit that perspective changes were less obvious compared to blocky buildings, so they could get away with static sprites. Suzuki felt passionate about this new direction for the game, but wasn't sure if it would catch on with the target demographic. His managers shared his concern and were skeptical of the more outlandish setting and the fact that none of their 3D perspective shooter games had been successful. He went as far as agreeing to pay back his salary if it were to fail commercially, and so he was allowed to proceed with his vision.
Welcome to the Fantasy Zone.
Despite a packed development schedule, the team still ran into a few happy accidents that would further shape the direction of their game. For example, Suzuki would deliberately wipe the color RAM during presentations for management. It gave the game an unfinished look, and so bought the team more time. During one presentation, the color wipe resulted in a striking color scheme for the sky, which they used in the final game. Space Harrier's art style really stood out among shooter games thanks to its use of soft gradients and pastel colors. The game's soundtrack was another standout feature. Hiroshi Kawaguchi had earned the role of dedicated composer thanks to his work on Hang On. He could now fully concentrate on writing music, resulting in the game's iconic and lengthy main theme. Another big attraction of Space Harrier were the boss battles, still quite a novelty concept at the time. Complex algorithms animated an array of similar sprite tiles to create dynamic flying monsters. It was yet another piece of the puzzle solved in making the game fit within the limited video RAM. As a fun little reference, one of the bosses was named after the designer for the original Harrier game concept. Individual bosses also had their own music theme. Yu Suzuki, once an aspiring rock guitarist himself, contributed to the two more guitar-driven boss themes.
Get ready.
While the Harrier team finished up the project, the rest of the company moved to Sega's new office. The company had expanded considerably in the past 2 years. At the start of the 80s, all development had been situated on the same floor, but from this point on, hardware, arcade, and console development became separate departments. At Sega's old office, production on Space Harrier had successfully wrapped. The game was ready for its debut in the fall of 1985. The moving hydraulic seat that had been the starting point was a big attraction, but arguably the greatest appeal was the unique fantasy sci-fi world, which helped deliver Sega a hit in the 3D shooter genre. Space Harrier demonstrated the utility in drawing from left-field sources, from Roger Dean to the contemporary cinema hit The Never-Ending Story. Suzuki's broad range of interests and hobbies exposed him to a wide variety of different concepts and imagery, a great asset for any creative. The broad acclaim of Space Harrier and Hang On made them important properties to the company. Both games were key titles in Sega's venture into the home console market. In their days before having a mascot, they essentially gave the company their identity, a developer of innovative, cutting-edge video games. Suzuki, now on a winning streak, wanted to keep up the pace. He immediately began working on 2 new projects that could build on the concept and game code from Hang On. Enduro Racer showcased his passion for off-road racing, while Outrun would ooze the more luxurious lifestyle of the mid-80s. Among the concepts considered were a range of selectable cars and special events happening at checkpoints. Taking inspiration from the 1981 movie The Cannonball Run, Outrun would be set on a highway between regular traffic, completely breaking away from the circuit setting. Extensive research and building on real-world experience was Suzuki's desired way of shaping his game plans. For his new driving game, he organized a full research trip, something unheard of at that point in game development. Suzuki and his producer Yoji Ishii grabbed the plane to Frankfurt in the spring of '86. Upon their arrival, the two rented a BMW Series 3 and hit the road speeding over the Autobahn. Their tour led them along a scenic route, passing Chamonix and Monaco, cruising through the Côte d'Azur to Milan, and to their final destination, Rome. The couple of weeks were well spent. They'd shot hours of footage on videotape, but also got a real taste of enjoying a trip passing beautiful scenery. An added benefit of these field trips was the possibility of running into unexpected events. The two Sega developers spotted the brand new Ferrari Testarossa in Monaco with its striking red paint job shining in front of the bright blue sky. After this encounter, there was no doubt who the star of their game was going to be. Back at their Tokyo headquarters, Suzuki had a clear grasp of what he wanted to achieve. The racing game was to give the player the emotional enjoyment of driving a supercar, passing picturesque landscapes with a love interest at your side. It perfectly tied in with the zeitgeist, the jet-set lifestyle that reached homes around the world through music videos and TV series. When it came to gathering more information on Ferrari's latest supercar, they were lucky enough to get an appointment with one of the 3 Testarossa owners in Japan. The SEGA developers recorded the sound of the engine and took photographs from every angle as reference for the pixel art. The arcade board for Outrun was given a considerable update, adding more memory and processing power, widening the gap between home gaming and the arcades. On top of that, all graphic data and game code would surpass 2 megabytes. A ROM-sized Sega and Nintendo home game cartridges would not reach until 6 years later. Using the new board, they could have huge numbers of sprites and implement 2 road layers with variable heights. However, producing these impressive visuals came at a cost. Updates to the road layer and remaining graphics had to be done on alternating frames, and thus they had to sacrifice the 60 FPS experience present in Hang On. Nevertheless, Outrun would still provide a fully immersive experience. Layers of trees, rocks, and bushes pass by at blazing speeds, all displayed on the top-of-the-line Nanao monitors. Sega's hardware division once again constructed the stylish and immersive arcade cabinet that incorporated the signature properties of the Testarossa. Like Space Harrier, the deluxe arcade machine would include a hydraulic seat to simulate the movements in the game. While Space Harrier had been a fantasy concept, Suzuki returned to what defined his games, their sense of realism paired with the fun of gaming. In line with this vision, the Testarossa wouldn't explode after a crash like most other racers, but spin and tumble around. Part of the skill of an arcade game designer is to walk the fine line of satisfying both players and arcade owners. Suzuki carefully calculated the number of minutes an average session could last to hit the goal of 200 tokens per day. The race starts out easy on a separate drive lane without traffic, allowing the player to get accustomed to the controls. The slowly ramping difficulty gives players a satisfying experience and a taste for more. Furthermore, Outrun provided the player with the freedom to choose their own route through the game. 15 tracks in total and 5 fun little ending sequences would all add to the longevity of the game. When it came to the music, it was important that it matched the concept of the project. The team came up with the idea of simulating the experience of listening to your cassette collection or radio while driving. Players were able to select their favorite station, and it was therefore important that each of the main tracks were completely different in genre, ranging from rock to fusion to Latin. The Outrun arcade board included a more sophisticated version of the Yamaha FM chip. It had double the number of channels, which meant it could play more instruments simultaneously. Combined with the increased memory capacity for audio samples, this resulted in a fuller sound and helped to make Kawaguchi's compositions for Outrun become timeless classics. Outrun would be a standout among racing games, offering the luxury lifestyle experience for arcade goers for just a couple of tokens. It was another monumental release in the history of the company. It became their best-selling machine at the time and was ported to countless platforms. Suzuki was among the young recruits to rise to the occasion and help Sega achieve their success. After finishing up work on Outrun, Suzuki and his core team moved into a separate office space dubbed Room 128. They were given more autonomy over their own day-to-day scheduling and work-related procedures to fulfill their next assignment, delivering the company yet another mega hit. While they began work on an air combat-themed game, their colleagues in the main office were becoming equally successful. By 1987, Sega was not only among the top arcade manufacturers, but a true powerhouse in video game development. The company had soared to new heights, and it was a candidate to be listed on the second section of the Tokyo Stock Exchange that year. However, this also put more pressure on Sega, as they had to provide a management plan and projected earnings. Suzuki's new game in development, Afterburner, was given a tight deadline by management to hit their financial goals. He didn't want to release an unfinished game, but also understood the new state of affairs inside the company. The solution was to wrap up the core game on time and offer an extended build via a ROM update. After Sega had successfully qualified for the exchange listing, Suzuki kept working on his envisioned version of the game over the following 3 months. The final polished build was branded Afterburner 2, and along with more levels would include fun cameos of his previous hits. the rotating arcade cabinet would lead once again to an exciting experience for players and take their breath away. And although it wasn't directly inspired by Top Gun, Afterburner nicely tied in with the home release of the movie. Suzuki's hits all aligned perfectly with the zeitgeist, but also became true icons of the 80s themselves.
On the street, you don't get another quarter.
While Suzuki's team continued developing games built on their winning principles, the arcade market kept advancing at a rapid pace. It pressured SEGA to quickly start preparing for a new generation of gaming. It would be a new chapter for Yu Suzuki, who by the late 80s was appointed to lead this important revolution inside the company to enter the world of polygonal graphics.